When I was in school, our textbooks looked something like this. They didn't just steal Africa's land. They rewrote its history. And we believed their lies. For centuries, Africa's story has been told by outsiders who erased the continent's rich past to make colonization easier. In today's episode, we're going back to the source of those lies. We'll explore how colonial powers manipulated narratives about Africa to paint the continent as primitive, empty, and in need of a European savior. So let's start at the beginning. Missionaries came to Africa in the late 1800s, not only to convert people to Christianity, but also to change how Africans saw themselves. And they began this rewrite by claiming that Africans had no history or any kind of writing. In fact, missionaries spent a lot of time destroying oral traditions and sacred texts, which have played a big role in many African societies. As a result, many Africans grew up believing that their cultural practices and beliefs were outdated and superstitious. For example, one missionary wrote, "The wild state of the natives is very similar to that of children. Their minds are entirely given up to superstition and their understanding seems to be very limited." Or here, "The African is regarded by nature as inferior to the European, incapable of progress, mutable live data, and fit only for servitude." These writings framed Africa as a blank slate before European arrival, making it seem as if colonization was bringing civilization to a previously uncivilized land. Missionaries also encouraged the burning of griots, West African storytellers and historians who preserved ancestral knowledge and genealogy through songs and poems. This silencing aimed to break the link between generations and sever ties to pre-colonial African life. Now, beyond missionaries, there was another weapon of mass deception: maps. The traditional map of the world, the Mercator projection, minimizes Africa's size. This distorts our perception, making it appear less significant than it actually is. Consider this. The same continent where ancient empires like Egypt and Kush flourished is now crammed into a tiny space labeled Africa. Even more, ancient empires like Songhai, Benin, and others are either ignored or reattributed to non-African origins. This narrative frames Europe as the cradle of civilization and the rest of the world as backwards, setting the stage for domination. Another trick is the word tribes replacing kingdoms. When talking about Africa, this shift reinforces the idea that African societies were primitive and unchanging. I mean, imagine calling the Roman Empire a tribe. That's how you diminish greatness. It's a deliberate erasure of complexity, reducing rich cultures to simplistic labels. But the erasure didn't stop there. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Europeans descended on Africa, looting priceless artifacts from museums and private collections. Meanwhile, African art and relics ended up in European museums where they remain to this day. One example is the Benin bronzes, priceless sculptures stolen from the Kingdom of Benin in 1897. Today, these bronzes are scattered across European museums, denying Benin people the chance to reclaim and reconnect with their cultural heritage. Or consider the mysterious Queen of Sheba coins, looted from Ethiopia and now displayed at the British Museum. These treasures are more than objects. They are tangible links to the past, but Africa can't use them to tell its own stories. This theft wasn't just material. It went deeper, impacting how European scholars portrayed African societies. Let's talk about an academic named William J. Perry, a proponent of social Darwinism. This guy took things to a whole new level of racism. He collected African skulls, not for medical research or anthropology, but to rank African cultures by what he called evolution. He claimed that African skulls were less evolved than European ones, using pseudoscientific methods to support his racist beliefs. Imagine the audacity. These so-called experts categorized African skulls based on their perceived primitiveness. This isn't just about racism. It's about silencing alternative narratives. For instance, European anthropologists refused to credit Great Zimbabwe with being one of the largest stone structures in the world, choosing instead to blame Portuguese explorers. Similarly, Timbuktu, once a flourishing center of Islamic scholarship, became a supposed curiosity, a mere footnote in European narratives. But the rewriting didn't end with artifacts and academic censorship. It extended to libraries and Islamic manuscripts as well. During colonial times, many African languages were unwritten. Knowledge and history were passed down orally through generations. However, European colonizers sought to suppress these traditional knowledge systems, viewing them as inferior to European education. For example, they targeted griots in West Africa, who were like historians and storytellers. The griots had a deep knowledge of genealogy, history, and oral traditions, but the colonizers saw them as nothing more than entertainers. They even went as far as destroying griots' instruments and forbidding them from practicing their craft. And then there were the countless African languages. Colonizers deemed them as primitive and without any literary tradition, failing to recognize that this was because they hadn't been given the opportunity to develop written forms. This erasure of oral and indigenous knowledge left a lasting impact on generations of Africans. It created a sense of disconnection from their cultural heritage and contributed to the spread of the myth that Africa had no history before colonization. But it gets worse. What about the achievements of African civilizations? Well, they were intentionally overshadowed too. Take the Library of Timbuktu, for instance. During its peak, it housed over 40,000 manuscripts, many of which were irreplaceable. But when the city fell to colonial powers, they burned parts of the library, destroying invaluable historical texts. It wasn't just physical destruction. European scholars also undermined the value of non-European languages and knowledge. For example, when they encountered ancient African texts written in Arabic or local scripts, they often dismissed them as unimportant or heretical, failing to appreciate the wealth of knowledge contained within. The deliberate erasure of African voices and perspectives led to a distorted global narrative. It reinforced stereotypes that Africa was a land without a written history or advanced civilizations. This distortion continues to have profound implications for how African history is understood and taught around the world. Think about it. If African voices and contributions are silenced, how can we truly grasp the complexities of African history? How can we learn about the vibrant civilizations, the intellectual achievements, and the rich cultural traditions that have shaped the continent? Without access to these perspectives, we are left with a fragmented and incomplete picture of African history. And the damage goes beyond just a lack of knowledge. Erasing African voices contributes to a sense of dispossession and alienation. When Africans are denied the opportunity to share their stories, it reinforces the notion that their cultures are inferior or irrelevant. This can lead to a loss of cultural identity and a diminished sense of self-worth. But the erasure of African history is not just about ignorance or prejudice. It is a deliberate strategy used to maintain power imbalances and perpetuate stereotypes. By controlling the narrative, colonizers could justify their exploitation of African resources and the subjugation of African people. A history that erases agency allows for the continuation of harmful stereotypes and systemic inequalities. So why did they do this? Well, think about it. Why would anyone want to steal your history? Simple: control. Those who rewrite history control the narrative, which makes it easier to control people. When you erase a people's history, you erase their identity. And when you erase their identity, you can easily manipulate them. You can treat them however you want because they don't know who they are or what they're capable of. I mean, look at the generations of Africans who grew up believing that they were inferior, that they couldn't achieve anything great because they weren't taught otherwise. It's a form of mental slavery that has lasted for generations. The rewriting of African history happened systematically. It was part of the colonial education system. Textbooks used in African schools often presented a distorted version of African history, perpetuating harmful stereotypes and minimizing the contributions of African civilizations. The intentional omission of important events, figures, and perspectives created a sense of disconnection from African heritage. Imagine growing up learning about great civilizations like Greece and Rome, but never hearing about the achievements of Carthage or Aksum, even though they were contemporaries. That kind of imbalance creates a skewed worldview. It reinforces the idea that Western narratives are superior and diminishes the sense of pride and accomplishment that comes from knowing one's history. To understand the true impact of this rewriting, think about the ripple effects. Generations of Africans were taught to believe the colonial narrative, internalizing a sense of inferiority and cultural deficiency. It's a cycle that perpetuates itself. When one generation is taught to despise their own culture, the next generation inherits that mindset, making it even harder to break free from the cycle. So how does this affect us today? Well, it's a question of identity, dignity, and justice. The erasure of African history has left a deep psychological wound. It's a trauma that has been passed down through generations, shaping how Africans perceive themselves and their place in the world. When African history is erased, it reinforces harmful stereotypes and contributes to the marginalization of African voices. It is a disservice to the rich tapestry of African cultures and achievements and perpetuates a distorted global narrative. So what can we do about it? First, we can listen to and amplify African voices. It's crucial to create platforms that allow African storytellers to share their narratives and challenge dominant stereotypes. Supporting organizations and initiatives that promote African voices and perspectives is vital in this regard. Second, we can push for inclusive and accurate education. Advocating for curricula that incorporate African history and perspectives is essential in dismantling the legacy of erasure. Encouraging critical thinking and media literacy can help individuals recognize and challenge biased narratives. Third, we can confront stereotypes and biases in the media and popular culture. Challenging stereotypes and biases whenever we encounter them can help break down harmful perceptions. Engaging in open and honest conversations about race and history can foster empathy and understanding. Fourth, we can support museums and initiatives that prioritize the repatriation of stolen artifacts. Supporting museums that prioritize the repatriation of stolen artifacts and cultural objects is a step towards acknowledging and addressing this injustice. And fifth, we can continue to educate ourselves. Learning about African history, culture, and perspectives from diverse sources can broaden our understanding and challenge stereotypes. Engaging with African scholars, writers, and storytellers can provide invaluable insights. Ultimately, rewriting the rewrite is about reclaiming the truth. It's about ensuring that African history is not just taught in classrooms, but is woven into the fabric of our collective memory. It's a process that requires continuous effort, empathy, and solidarity. But it's a journey that is essential for creating a more inclusive, accurate, and compassionate understanding of our shared past. Subscribe to History Rewritten and take back what they tried to erase.